Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is demand. Let's take a moment to look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear demand used is to mean to insist on having something. This is the most common way you are likely going to hear this verb used or see it used as you're reading. What I would encourage my students to think about here with this particular verb is this is a very strong action, right? Someone is not saying, I'd like this, right? It's really like, I must have it, right? They insist on it. A second way you might see demand used is to mean to ask in an authoritative way. Now, with this definition, my mind immediately goes to literature and storytelling. And so, if you can imagine a particular character saying something like, "Where have you been?" And then it might be after that is in quotations, you might see he demanded. So he asked in a very authoritative way, a very strong, commanding type of way. A third way you might hear demand used is to mean to require or need something. Now, this definition isn't used just with individuals. We might be talking about machines. A particular machine demands this kind of treatment or this type of servicing. It requires it, it needs it. A fourth way you might hear demand used is to mean to call into court. Now, this definition is very specific to the legal field. So, if you're not in law or not interacting in that way, you're probably not going to hear this fourth definition used very frequently. You should know, though, that demand is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all I need to do is add ing to form demanding. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb, demand, ends in a D sound. And this means that we're going to add an extra syllable when we go to make the past tense or participle form. Okay, so my ed ending here is going to be pronounced id. So it should sound like this: demanded, demanded. Okay, so I hope you can hear how demand has two syllables, and when we add that ed ending, now we have three: demanded. Okay. Now, there is a phrasal verb that you might encounter, actually two, but their meaning is pretty much the same. So you might hear demand from or demand of. And both of these phrasal verbs go back to that idea of insisting that someone or something do something or provide something or maybe give up something. So this really ties back to that first definition we looked at. I've got a couple example sentences just to help illustrate how these phrasal verbs might be used. One is the teacher demands full attention from her students. So generally, what we're going to see is demand and the particle separated with this particular phrasal verb. So, kind of the what that someone is doing, providing, or giving up. Okay? And then after from, we know the someone or the something that is being asked to do, provide, or give up something. Another example here: do you demand the full attention of your students? Here, again, is a question. You can see how it's separated. Um, I thought this might be an interesting question, particularly if there are any other teachers reading or watching this. Um, I thought about this question as well. So I would say pre-pandemic, yes, I wanted my students' full attention. I didn't want them looking at their cell phones. But now I do the majority of my teaching online via Zoom. And I know most of my students are at home. The majority have small children at home and they're trying to balance school with taking care of their family. And so I think I've relaxed a little bit. I'm a little less rigid as an instructor, and I'm not insisting that my students give me their full attention. Now, let's continue practicing our verb of the day. And today we'll practice the past perfect and the present perfect. Let's start with the past perfect. We use this verb tense to note that a particular action occurred at some point in the past. Usually it's before another time or before another action. To form the past perfect, I'm going to have my subject, I'm going to have the past form of have, which is had, and then I'm going to use that ed form of my verb since this is a regular verb. Let's look at an affirmative example. Honduras denied that it had demanded $2.5 billion in aid from Taiwan. Okay. This particular sentence comes from news stories in the last 3 to 4 weeks, and again, it's this idea of strongly insisting. So here, insisting that Taiwan provide this large amount of aid. Now, if you want to make a negative past perfect sentence, we do that by starting with our subject, then had not, and then the ed form of the verb. You might also hear the contraction hadn't. That's in my example sentence. The athlete hadn't demanded to be traded to another team. As I looked for examples of how demand gets used, this was a really common one. I don't think it's just specific to US sports teams or professional sports teams, but occasionally we will have a player who says, I am not going to play for this team, you must, right? I am insisting you trade me to another team. Let's talk about making a yes or no question in the past perfect. To do this, I start with had, then I'm going to have my subject, and then the ed form of the verb. Here's another example. Had the school demanded this commitment from all of its students before the pandemic? Okay. So I feel like that question's a great one to sort of illustrate that idea of this action occurring before a certain point in time. Now, let's talk about the present perfect. We use this verb tense to talk about an action that started in the past and continues into the present. We also use it to describe completed actions, but those actions are completed at an unknown point in the past. Sometimes you'll see books or maybe other teachers call this the indefinite past tense. And when I go to make a present perfect sentence, I really need to pay attention to my subject. If my subject is I, you, we, or they, then I'm going to use have and then the participle form of a verb. Okay? But if my subject is he, she, or it, I'm going to use has and then the participle. Let's take a look at an example sentence. The kidnappers have demanded $1 million ransom. Okay? So again, here someone might be saying, I'm not going to safely return this person or set them free until I receive this. Now, if you want to make a negative present perfect sentence, we're going to have our subject and then have or has, then not, and then the participle. You might also hear the contractions hasn't or haven't, and then the participle. Let's take a look at another example. The company hasn't demanded that employees respond to emails over the weekend. Okay, so here they are not insisting that employees do this. Now let's look at making that yes or no question in the present perfect. To do this, I start with have or has, whichever form matches my subject. That subject comes next, and then the particle form or participle form of my verb. Here's my final example. Have many politicians demanded an investigation? So, again, as I looked at various newspaper articles, magazines using this particular verb, this was something that came up quite frequently. Many US politicians insisting that certain things happen. Um, or sometimes before something else will occur or before there can be an agreement regarding new legislation. Now, let's spend the last few moments looking at some words and phrases that are related to our verb demand. And the first word we're going to look at is the noun form of this word. The noun demand has the exact same pronunciation and the exact same spelling. Like our verb, this noun can have a couple different meanings. We're going to talk about two today. The first way to use the noun demand is to talk about an insistent request. So, again, this is strongly worded. This is not just like, I would like this, right? It must happen. You need to do this or you need to make this happen. An example of this might be the customer's demands were unreasonable. Okay? So, whatever the customer was insisting a worker do, right? It was not fair, not not something that would generally be expected. So that's why you see that adjective there, unreasonable. Now, a second way you hear demand used is connected to the topic of economics. So it refers to the desire of buyers or consumers um, for a particular product or a service. Let's look at an example of this. Demand for electric cars is booming. Okay, so what this sentence is saying is many people want to buy this particular type of car. Okay, so it's talking about the desire to have this particular type of vehicle. Now let's move on and talk about a phrase you might encounter. The phrase is in demand. This is going to tie back to that second definition we were just talking about. So, if something is in demand, many people are seeking it, or maybe many people want to buy it. So, I'm going to take the last sentence and just kind of alter it a bit to use this phrase. Electric cars are in demand, just like we talked about. Many people want to buy them. The last phrase we'll discuss today is on demand. This can mean that someone is doing something as soon as possible or whenever it is wanted or whenever it is required. An example of this. This app allows you to watch movies on demand. So this would be like whenever you want to watch the movie, right? You might tap a few buttons, click a few things, and there's the movie. And you can watch it whenever you want. You don't have to wait for a particular time or something else to occur in order to be able to watch it. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.